Hello folks, it's Larry Hoxton with Saving Local History. I figure since I've had a small presence on YouTube and Facebook for a few years, that it was time I told you a little bit more about me and saving local history. In this video I'm going to tell you how I got interested in history. Then I'm going to give you 27 of my best research tips, followed by the story behind 20 sites that I've found or in the process of finding using some of these tips. So if you'd like to learn some of the ways I find sites and hear some interesting stories, please stay tuned. This may turn out to be a long video, but hopefully it'll be worth watching to the end. As always, I'd like to thank you for watching my videos and for subscribing to my channel. It really helps me stay motivated. By the way, I chose the name Saving Local History because I figure that no matter where you're at, the history around you is local to somebody. While I was out of commission recently with COVID, and I was really sick, I spent a lot of time thinking about all the places I'd found and learned about, and I began wondering if I'd ever see any of them again. So I'm on a mission to document as many of these sites as I can while I'm still able. So let's get started. My dad loved to hunt and fish and really loved the mountains, and he started taking me with him when I was very young. And I was always mystified at the stories he would tell me and all the things he'd show me. I don't know exactly when it happened, but somewhere, during this period of time, I found my first arrowhead. This sparked an interest in me to learn everything I could about the Indians that were in this area and when they were here. What really got me on this lifetime quest for knowledge, I guess, was when my dad started telling me stories about Rufus Pickle. Rufus was born in 1896, was a local collector, slash archaeologist of sorts, and he had an unbelievable museum in his basement of his house. When Dad took me to see his collection for the first time, I was completely spellbound. He had Indian artifacts, Civil War relics, fossils, minerals, woolly mammoth tusks, prehistoric animal teeth and bones, and what seemed like a little bit of everything else. It was hard to believe that one man could accumulate this much stuff in a lifetime. Rufus also loved to talk about his collection, and of course I loved to listen and ask questions, so I learned a lot from him. Here's a piece of limestone, up here on this side, with iron pyrite in it, better known as fool's gold, that Rufus gave me many years ago, and I think of him every time I look at it. I've always been fascinated with history and learning new things, and I read every book I could get my hands on related to my interest. I couldn't wait for the bookmobile to come to the elementary school so I could check out more books. Reading has taken me to so many far-off places and taught me so much over the years. Almost every Sunday when the weather was good, me and Dad would pick up my pawpaw at Hoxton and Dad's old Willis Jeep station wagon, and we'd head to the back of mountains, as they called it. Between Dad and Pawpaw and a lot of other people that tagged along with us, they taught me the names of all the places and just so much more about everything else. And they also introduced me to a lot of the landowners and other people in charge, that would be really important to me later on. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I was allowed to go hunting by myself with the old 410 gauge shotgun. I'd spend from daylight till dark many days in the mountains, and it seemed like every time I went out, I'd venture just a little bit further. Soon I'd connected all the dots and I could quickly move from one place to the other, and I felt like I was really getting to know these mountains like my dad and Pawpaw. Mom always liked to call me Daniel Boone because I liked to hunt by myself. These hunting trips were rarely about hunting though. I'd bring home a squirrel or two every now and then for supper, but before long these trips became more about exploring, and I soon replaced my shotgun with a shovel on a lot of my adventures. I was always looking for arrowheads or chips in the cow paths and anywhere the ground was bare. Any place I found that looked like an old house place back then, I'd explore it and I'd follow it in my memory and hope to go back someday. I was looking for fossils or marbles or anything else of interest I could find. Along about this time, when I was 12 years old, I made my first great discovery. I was catching crawdads in a creek across from the house, and I turned over a rock, and when the water splashed back on it, I could clearly see a footprint. I had found what I've always called my dinosaur footprint. Every time Dad and I would find a spring in the mountains, he'd always take the time to clean it out for the next person who came by thirsty. Before long, I knew where every spring was in the mountains and how to find them. I knew that the settlers and the Indians all had to have water, so each of these springs was another potential place for me to discover history. We didn't have social media or cell phones back then. People actually congregated at many places and just talked. You know what they talked about most of the time? The past. So I was listening. I was always listening. I was like a sponge trying to absorb it all. When I started high school, I found a real treasure, a new library. This library was huge compared to the bookmobile from elementary school. I bet over the course of the next 5 years I read every book available on all the subjects that interest me, like archaeology and geology, anthropology, Indians, pyramids, ancient civilizations, dinosaurs, astronomy, hunting, fishing, and everything in between. Then I started buying books when I could. I just kept reading everything I could get my hands on. Of course, most of this is available on the internet or TV right now, but back then all we had were books or maybe an occasional magazine to learn new things. When I started driving, I really expanded my home range. I could now go almost anywhere within driving distance to explore. But now I'd made so many friends and acquaintances that I rarely had any trouble getting permission to go where I wanted. This was about the time I started hunting ginseng. And this opened up so much more territory to me because ginseng grows in the rougher places in the mountains and along the cliffs and so forth. So this allowed me to find a lot of places I'd missed before. Driving also took me to many new libraries and a lot of new books. By now, though, I was smart enough to know, that I would never see the pyramids of Egypt or Stonehenge or the statues on Easter Island or any of the Inca or Mayan or Aztec ruins or any of the other wonderful places that I'd read about. But it didn't stop me from wanting to learn about them. One thing that really fascinated me was Coral Castle. If you've ever heard of it, you need to do yourself a favor, look online and read about it. I really hope to see it someday. Since I figured I'd never see this distant places, I made a firm decision to try to learn everything I could about the world around me. Most people never take the time to look around them. Our mountains are filled with beauty and mystery, and if you look hard enough, you can find many treasures from the past, some hidden in plain sight. Then tragedy struck my family in many ways. On December 28, 1974, my Papa Hawkston, who was born in these mountains in 1898, passed away. He and Dad were very close, and to me, probably the biggest influences in my life. 5 days later, on January 2nd, 1975, in those same mountains, I found my dad late at night where he had died from a apparent heart attack while grouse hunting. My life changed forever that night, and to this day I can still see Dad's footprints in the mud while I was trying to find him. Then on May the 10th, 1975, I was shot in the back of the head and the back in a hunting accident in these same mountains. A few years later, I gave up hunting and started, focusing on my other hobbies. So I have a unique connection to these mountains and a reason to learn everything I can about them. Well, one day some of my cousins came to see me and said they had found a cave with what looked like coffins in it and wanted me to, go with them to try to figure out what they'd found. Of course, I was really interested, so off we went. Up until then, I'd only been in about maybe 2 or 3 caves. As it turned out, the coffins were the remains of leaching vats from the extraction of saltpeter that had been started in that cave in the early 1700s. Now I immediately had a new hobby. Over the next several years, one of my high school friends, Brent Price, and I explored over 400 caves. As usual, I learned a lot from a book titled Exploring Caves, written by Dave McClurg. Before long, we put together all the gear we needed, and we learned how to move up and down the ropes safely and everything else we needed to know, and off we went, self-taught cavers. Over the course of a couple of years, I bought all the topo maps I could find of the area, within driving distance of home. And I also bought a couple of books that listed many of the caves in Virginia, and some of them had the GPS coordinates. I wrote a computer program that would help me convert these GPS coordinates along with data from the maps to a format where I could easily mark these locations on my maps. I tried to mark all the cave locations I could in the areas we planned to explore. Of course, our biggest interest was finding new, unexplored caves. I turned the location of close to 50 new caves over to the state of Virginia, but I didn't turn over the location of all of them. Soon I bought a handheld GPS unit where I could mark the locations of the caves and other points of interest that we found. Now I had Indian village, old houses, river crossings, caves, including many Indian burial caves and many other points of interest marked on my maps. A little side note, we always obeyed the caver's motto, take nothing but pictures, leave nothing but footprints, and kill nothing but time. We tried to leave every cave as we had found it. Here's a quick caving story. You remember earlier I mentioned Rufus Pickle? Well, he found a lot of his Indian relics in caves. He told me a story one time of a cave he visited where he had to use a rope to drop over 100 feet to the cave floor. He didn't have any gear like we use today. He had a rope with knots, about every foot or so, and he usually explored alone. He had gone to this cave at night and lowered a lantern into the cave and made his way to the bottom. It turned out to be a large burial cave that is probably still, for the most part, untouched. He also told me that he had always been an atheist up until that night. He said he was tired and muddy and had climbed about 50 feet out of the cave, and his arms just gave out and his lantern burned out at about the same time. He said that was the first time he had prayed in his life, and he said he felt like God saved him that night. Many years later at night I went to the very same cave with a couple of my best friends. They stayed on top while I rappelled into the cave. I wanted to get just a little bit of the feeling Rufus must have had many years before. As I explored the floor of the cave, I found a bone bead. This is one of the only relics I've ever removed from a cave. I felt like Rufus had guided me to it, and I think of him every time I look at it. Well, while I was climbing the rope on my way out of the cave, I stopped about halfway up and turned off my light. That was a scary feeling, even with the good ropes and equipment I was using. I remember it was just so deathly quiet except for the faint drops of water you could hear dripping off the formations in the cave. Then there was another bigger-than-life figure that comes into play as far as local Indian culture in the prehistoric period around the area, and that was Roby Maiden. Roby had spent his entire life like Rufus collecting mostly Indian relics. He had a second sense when it came to finding stuff, and I think he was probably more knowledgeable than any of the archaeologists that I met many years later. His nephew recently brought me several photos of a small part of the Maiden collection. It's unbelievable. Here's a story I'll relate about Roby. Roby would leave work and walk to a dig he had started weeks before. He had dug approximately 12 feet deep in a sinkhole and found almost 1,200 U-Mall projectile points, as he called them. I saw photos of these points years later, and it was just amazing what a site he was on. To finish the story, another local relic hunter who's kind of following in Roby's footsteps lived close by and found Roby's site one night and started digging in it. Roby noticed that somebody had been there and it made him real mad. He pulled up his ladder and filled the hole in before daylight. He said he would always wonder what else was left there. Here's another quick story I'll relate about Roby. He too found a lot of his relics in caves. Through a chain of events, he had found a burial cave that was very unusual. Roby went along one of the walls in this cave pecking with a rock or a shovel, and he heard a place that sounded hollow. He said that often Indians would build a fake wall to protect the burials. He broke through the wall, and it must have been much like the discovery of King Tut. He said the floor of the cave had burials all the way around the walls, and he could still see the footprints of the Indians that had probably came in there and buried them. This still gives me the chills to this day when I think about it. Then there was Jack Pickle, no relation to Rufus, who took me under his wing and taught me so much and shared with me all of the sites he could remember. Jack was one of my best friends. He told me so many stories about the old timers that used to dig in the area, where they'd found stuff and what they'd found. Since I always wanted to be an archaeologist, I've never come to terms with the way so many sites have been destroyed, but I can understand completely, why so many of them were. My Uncle Bill Fry loved to collect arrowheads, and he'd often take a bunch of us kids with him. Later I started driving. I picked up my Uncle Bill, and we spent a whole day in my old Golden Eagle Jeep with the top off. He showed me many of the Indian sites where he had picked up arrowheads over the years. I'll never forget that day. Then over the course of 20 years, my best friend of all times, Ken Collins, and I fished every river and stream within driving distance. You'd be amazed at how many old house places and things of interest are along these rivers and creeks. He also took me to a lot of places I had never been and told me stories of a lot of other interesting places in the mountains he knew about. We visited some of them. There were many others who confided in me their secret places because they knew they could trust me. I have honored every one of them, but now they have all passed on. I feel it's time to visit some of these sites and to follow up on some of the stories they told me. Growing up, my interest was much more than history. I wanted to learn everything I could about everything I could. I taught myself how to play the guitar and banjo and spent many years picking all over this part of the country. I met so many amazing people, and I always tried to discuss my interest in history and caves with any of them who would listen. This has opened up what still seems like an endless number of places I've got to visit. I learned to fix or build almost anything. I taught myself how to use and build computers. I've written many databases and computer programs and designed websites from scratch. I really latched on to this new technology wave, but at the same time I could foresee the impact it would have on this world as I knew it. I was stuck between two worlds. I was stepping cautiously into this new era, but I had one foot firmly planted in the past. Here's another quick story. Dad and Mom had raked and scraped for a long time to buy me a Gibson banjo. A few days after getting it, Dad come home from work, and there I sat in the floor. I'd completely disassembled my brand new banjo. I mean, it was just laying there in parts. And Dad asked, "Why in the world did you do that?" And I said, "Because I wanted to learn how it worked." I had a friend tell me years ago that what one man can do, another man can do. I'll never forget that bit of wisdom. When I started metal detecting in 1999, it was a replacement for Arrowhead hunting that had kind of gone away for the most part when the farmers stopped plowing. Given all my years of experience in the outdoors and my ability to research and apply my gut feelings, I've rarely had trouble finding great places to metal detect and relic hunt. When my buddy and I started relic hunting in the fall of 2000, I didn't know much at all about the Civil War. I only knew of places I learned about through research. By the beginning of 2005, we had dug Civil War relics on 31 different sites, all of which I had found by researching and keeping my eyes open. I've never had any desire to have somebody take me to a spot to detect. I love the challenge of finding the new sites myself. To me, the relics are not the history. They're only the clues that help us understand the history. On April 12, 2005, at about 1 p.m., my metal detecting for the most part ended. I had suffered sudden sensory hearing loss in my right ear. This left me almost deaf from that ear with the worst case of tinnitus my doctor said I'd ever had. This perceived noise in my ear has never let up since that day. I didn't completely quit detecting, but I only detected a few times a year. I tried all kinds of amplified headphones and gimmicks, but none of them helped. I bought other metal detectors and did the best I could, and in 2013 I had adjusted to my hearing loss enough to try to get by. I still have trouble hearing, especially the deep, faint signals, but I keep trying. I go to the nth degree to document what I find so as to help preserve its history, but I know in the long-term scheme of things that this documentation will probably mean very little. But it means a lot to me now, and it gives me a way to keep up with what I found, where I found it, and where it's stored or displayed. At this point, my documentation is easy since I've put a system in place. When I started watching YouTube videos, I saw a way that would really help me document what I was finding. I could make videos of each of my successful hunts, but there was a catch. I knew nothing about making videos. I didn't have any equipment or no idea how to get started. But now I had a tool to help me learn new things, and faster, the internet. You'll think I'm crazy, but I didn't want to go to any of my best sites until I understood what I was doing. I wanted to make sure once I recovered the relic or artifact that they'd become part of the video as part of my documentation. So on top of all the wonderful sites I actively hunt now, I've just added close to 100 more to my list. Now, assuming you've watched this video this far, I'm going to share 27 of my best research tips. I'm sure some of them will be new to you. Then I'm going to tell you about 20 new sites I found and how I found them. Most of them I've yet to visit. Tip number 1, get permission. Every piece of land is owned by somebody. Are there any exceptions? Maybe. I'll talk about this in one of my stories later on. Tip number 2 is other hobbies. Use your outdoor hobbies or start new ones. This will hook you up with many different people and hopefully take you to new places. You'd be surprised how much you can learn about history and how many great sites you can find by doing something else entirely different. Keep your eyes and ears open. Tip number 3, read and study. Read all the books, newspaper articles, microfilm, etc. you can that covers the areas you're interested in. You never know when an important clue will turn up. Tip number 4, libraries. Get library cards for every library you can and use them. They usually have a section on local history that can be an important part of your research. Tip number 5 is interlibrary loans. If you can find research material at a distant library, sometimes you can have it sent to a local library for a small fee. I've done this many times. Tip number 6 is centers of influence. Talk to all the old-timers you can find and ask them what they know about the area. Usually they love to talk about the old days. A lot of the old-timers are gone now, but the next group of old-timers like me have taken their place. So talk to the people who knew the old-timers when you can. Sometimes that's the only way treasure stories get passed down. Tip number 7, similar interest. Talk and associate with others who have similar interest. You can each learn a lot by this association. Tip number 8 is social media. Join and participate in social media groups with others of similar interest. Just be careful who you let into your inner circle. They may be interested in more than your friendship. Tip number 9, YouTube. Watch a lot of YouTube videos and subscribe to the channels that help you or entertain you. This is not a plug for my channel. I've got several different YouTube accounts and I've subscribed to a lot of great channels. I watch YouTube videos a lot and I've learned so much from them. Tip number 10, maps. Learn to use maps, both paper and digital. They're just loaded with important information when you learn how to interpret them. The internet has many great sources of online maps. Here's just a few I've used. USGS, Historical Topographic Map Explorer, Historic MapWorks, Gaia Maps, Land Matters, there's many more. Tip number 11, find a partner. Great minds think alike, but you have to be sure they're trustworthy. If not, you can lose a lot of sites you've worked hard to find. I'm sure many of you have been there and done that. I know I have. Tip number 12, landowners. Try to make friends with as many landowners as you can. It's not enough just to, ask them for permission. Genuinely try to get to know them first if you can. This alone can lead to many new sites. I've made so many of my best friends this way. Tip number 13, mutual friends. Sometimes it pays to get to know a friend of a landowner first and then have them introduce the two of you. Now you have a mutual friend, someone who'll put in a good word for you every now and then goes a long ways. Tip number 14, make notes. Make notes or keep a diary of everything you learn, especially on all the sites you find. At the very least, record the landowner's name and phone number. This may come in handy on down the road. Tip number 15 is courthouses. The local courthouses have a lot of historic information like deeds and wills and land plats, etc. Learn to use these resources, especially the deeds and land plats. Tip 16 is custom library. Build yourself a custom library. Collect all the information you can, both hard copy and digital. Organize it so you can find everything quickly. Most of my hard copy materials is within reach of my computer where the rest is stored digitally. Tip number 17, digital books. Convert all the important books in your library and the good ones you read into a digital format so you can search them. I've been doing this for years and I've got it streamlined to where it's very easy. I hope to make a video on my setup soon and show you how I do it. Can you imagine having a Civil War book where they talk about camping a whole lot? Just search for camp and you'll have a list of all the camps listed in the book. Tip number 18, organize your research. You need to keep up with all your research. Zotero is an online tool that does a fantastic job of helping you remember, everything. I've used it for many years. Tip number 19, Ancestry.com. This tool is a little expensive, but really helps when you're trying to track down some of the names you come across while you're doing your research. Tip number 20 is Census Data. Learn to use census data, both online and hard copy. You can find this information on Ancestry.com as well. Tip number 21 is internet. Learn to use the internet efficiently. It's filled with information, but it's also available to everyone. Everyone seems to want to search with Google. Try some other browsers. You'd be surprised what you find that Google misses. Tip number 22 is diaries. Diaries, especially handwritten ones, are a gold mine if you can find one related to your area. But to use them efficiently, you need to transcribe them, then convert them into digital files so you can search them. Tip number 23, GPS. Use your phone or GPS unit to record where all your finds were made. When you display all the waypoints from a site on one map, like magic, a pattern emerges. You can also record your tracks to help see where you've searched. This tip alone has helped me find countless relics. Tip number 24 is photos. Take photos of your finds on the spot where they were found with your phone. Be sure to turn location on so the GPS coordinates will be recorded with the photo. I keep location turned on all the time on my Android smartphone. Then you can see exactly where that piece was found by the GPS coordinates. Just drag and drop the photos into Google Earth or a similar mapping program, and you can instantly see where they were all found. Tip number 25 is open your eyes. Keep your eyes open. No matter where you are or what you're looking for, always keep your eyes on the ground and your surroundings. You'd be surprised what is still just laying on top of the ground, hidden in plain sight. Tip number 26 is persistence. Never give up. A lot of times you might decide to just give up on something you've spent a lot of time researching. Sometimes you just have to step back and just look at it from a different perspective. Many times you'll run across the one clue you were missing from what seems like a totally unrelated source. And tip number 27, trust your gut. This one goes without saying. The more you research and start finding new sites, the more you will develop a feel, for what you're looking for. Now here's a brief description of 20 sites I've found or trying to find using many of these tips. The ones closest to home will have to stay secret for now, sorry. Site number 1, it's the first Confederate campsite I found. I found this site without prior permission. I had read the detailed description of an overnight camp in a diary and commenced to try to find it with my new detecting buddy. At that time I couldn't find out who owned the land. I really tried. It was all grown up and looked like it had been that way for many years. Well, we got permission from the owner of the adjacent property so we could look at the ridge to see if, what the potential camp looked like. This was the first time my buddy and I had detected together. I had a Garrett GTI 2500 detector and he had one made by Radio Shack. Well, the ridge I wanted to detect was right across the fence and was grown up thick with blackberry briars. And there was a big hole in the fence that was very tempting. Here was my reasoning back then. If the camp was truly there, then I could try harder to find the landowner. If it wasn't there, then I wouldn't have to put up in all the work to find an owner and I could concentrate on finding the true location of the camp. Well, I went through the hole and found a flat spot and decided to walk backwards through the briars, stomping them down so I could detect as I went. In about 5 minutes I got a signal and I found a 69 caliber drop mini ball. After that I found a few more. I handed my detector to my buddy and he found his first bullet. He ended up hooked on relic hunting and the very next day he had a GTI 2500. I ended up with 5 69 caliber drop bullets and 5 drop gardeners that day and some miscellaneous stuff. And my buddy found several bullets as well. So now we were sure we were on the camp, now to get permission and to beg forgiveness for trespassing. I later found the owner and made an appointment to visit him at his office. As it turned out, years ago I had talked to the owner over the phone due to a mix-up in a business deal of sorts, and he remembered me. I told him that I'd been on his land looking for a Civil War camp, and I apologized to him for trespassing. He said that was fine and that I could go back any time I wanted. This is where it got real interesting. He had grown up on this land, and he told me that his grandmother used to tell him of a place she called Confederate Hill, but he didn't know why. This too was on his property, but it was grown up so much you couldn't detect it. I drove my Jeep up and down Confederate Hill trying to mash down the briars and the brush, but there was just no way. It was just too thick to detect. I believe this is a big camp I had been researching in that area because it was on a long flat ridge. The land eventually changed hands and I acquired permission from the new owner. Well, we made several trips back and every time we went we found relics. Now I notice that Confederate Hill has been cleared. I'll be going back very soon. Site number 2 is Confederate Trench. While ginseng hunting many years ago, I walked off a steep ridge and the next thing I knew I was standing in a huge trench. This was long before I started relic hunting. Many years later I traced a regiment of Confederate soldiers that apparently had camped in that area. This trench was probably used to defend their camp. Site number 3, Twin Trenches. Turkey hunting in an area far from home, I found another trench. I later learned that it had a twin across the valley. You know, where these trenches used to protect something. Many years before, my dad had showed me 2 huge log houses in the same area. In one of them, he said someone had found a jar of Indian head pennies that had fallen out of the ceiling and busted on the floor. I remember those houses well, and there's not even a trace of them remaining now. And I'm sure there were many other houses and buildings in that area in the distant past as well. Later, my research revealed that this mountain was used regularly by the Confederate soldiers. I suspect a winter camp or unknown battle site. Aerial photos show what looks like many more trenches or rifle pits in that area. Site number 4 is Buried Cannons. I met a doctor many years ago at a random music event I attended. You remember Rufus Pickle I talked about? Well, this doctor had a map that Rufus had drawn to where 2 Confederate cannons are supposed to be buried, but the doctor couldn't decipher the map. Lo and behold, someone overheard our conversation and told me that long ago Rufus had told him the same story. He was able to add a little to the story. Rufus had an old mine detector that had died on him. He wanted to borrow this other guy's metal detector that he had built from a Heath kit. Well, this was a long time ago. He borrowed the detector, and luckily the owner of it, still a teenager at the time, tagged along. Well, this teenager is an old man now, and he shared with me the location of the cannons. Site number 5, Cannonball Pyramid. A coon hunter relayed this story to me, told me roughly where it took place. He was supposedly hunting one night and came upon a pyramid of cannonballs on a high ridge. He told me he never went back, and he said he never discussed it with anyone else. Well, I found a record of a regiment crossing that very same mountain in the same area. Could this story be true? Site number 6 is Cannonball Factory. One of my friends told me that his dad knew where a hill was where they had made cannonballs. He used to work there and said they'd find them and roll them down the hill, but said he never kept any of them. He always thought that they'd made them somewhere on the farm. Well, my friend has already got us permission, but we've not gone yet. I've looked at that area on topo maps and aerial maps, and it's just in a great place. Where I knew the soldiers traveled through there, and it's near a crossroads and a huge stream. Site number 7, Civil War Cave number 1. A friend and I visited a cave one time that had signatures in the very back of it with dates from the Civil War era. After doing research, I found several of the names in a Confederate roster. This cave has a creek coming out of the entrance, sort of like a spring. Is it possible this regiment came close to the spring and the water and some soldiers explored this cave? Site number 8, Civil War Cave number 2. Speaking of caves, there's another cave that has Civil War soldier signatures on the ceiling. Don't know how they got there. The ceiling is nearly 12 feet from the floor. Research reveals that cannons may have been placed near this cave. Were the soldiers standing on boxes of supplies to write their names on the ceilings? Who knows? Anyway, one of my friends who's passed on now grew up near that cave, and he said they've rolled dozens of cannonballs off that hill over the years. This one is definitely on my list now. Site number 9, Cannonball Explosion. This same guy showed me a field where he said he was plowing with a tractor and heard an explosion behind his tractor. He said it sounded like a bomb going off. Anyway, when he came around the field again, there was a huge hole in the ground. He always thought it was a Civil War cannonball or a shell that he had hit, and exploded. There used to be an old chimney near this field, and it was near a ford in the river, maybe a camp of sorts. Site number 10, another buried cannon. I had a musician friend tell me about a cannon that was supposed to be buried on a farm where he once worked. He said professors from colleges and many others had looked for it for years without any luck. So I asked him, I said, what makes you think that there's a cannon buried on that land? He told me, well, the cannon was mentioned in an old deed. Well, I ended up at the courthouse and found a copy of the deed. I laid the plat out with a CAD program that I had and easily found where the cannon was and why it hadn't been found. I can't give you any more details, but I run my detector over the area and there's definitely something big right there. Site number 11, Archaic Indians. I have found many Archaic Indian sites over the years and I plan to revisit many of them. All of them are off the beaten path and I've only taken others of one of them over the years. I have found many great Indian artifacts on these sites but haven't visited any of them since November 1980. None of these sites have ever been plowed to my knowledge, so I'm sure there's a lot more at all of them. Site number 12, lost silver dollars. My grandmother was a source of some of my everlasting memories. She told me once of a trail back in the mountains where people used to spend an entire day walking to the next settlement to buy supplies. She said there was a fence on top of one of the ridges that people had trouble crossing. And she also said that many silver dollars had been found there in that area over the years, probably where they fell out of people's pocket crossing the fence. Well, I know exactly where that was, and there's no sign of a fence there now. Maybe it was a cache of silver dollars that had been buried or lost there. Who knows? Site number 13, Confederate winter camp. I found documentation a few years ago of a Confederate winter camp. It gives the name of the regiment that camped there and the owner of the property at the time. Several landmarks are also mentioned. I have unmistakably found this site but have yet to seek permission. It may have been found by someone else, but where it's located I kind of doubt it. Site number 14, 5 passageways to treasure. When I was very young, I had someone who was also born in the mountains tell me about a cave he and his dad had covered up with logs back when he was about 8 years old. So this puts it back many years. One night Dad and I was coon hunting on the mountain, and I told him about it. We were on top of a cliff at the time and had to go down through a real small treacherous pass just to get to the general area. Dad carried some dog leashes in his hunting coat made from webbing that came in handy on many occasions. Soon we found what looked like a cave. The hole went straight down about 10 or 12 feet. I wouldn't quit until Dad tied me to the straps and lowered me down to the cave floor. There I was able to shine my light into 5 different passageways. With all the history in this mountain, there's no telling what could be in that cave. Site number 15 is Indian Pictographs. On Paint Lick Mountain in an adjacent county to where I live, there's some pictographs made by the Indians. This is an archaeological site that's been protected for many years, but it's starting to really deteriorate. Well, one of my close friends related this story of some more pictographs on a different mountain to me. This is what he told me, sort of paraphrased. Many years ago, I had a guy tell me about some Indian paintings on a cliff. They were in a very secluded area that is well off the beaten path and very hard to get to. I didn't believe him, so we took a day off work to go see if we could find them. He was telling the truth. They were right where he said they were. He said he'd kept this secret for many years to protect them and never shared it with anyone else. Well, you guessed it. He shared the secret with me. I'll definitely plan a trip to check this one out as soon as I find a trustworthy partner to travel with me. It may end up having to be an overnight trip through bear and rattlesnake country, but it's on my list. Site number 16, Fields of Silver. One of my hobbies has been making music, as I mentioned, for many years. At a jam that my wife and I put on every Monday night, I met one of the best historians I've ever met. He was an unbelievable researcher on top of that, and getting to know him, I found out that he owned the property where an old school used to be back in the 40s. Well, a friend and I got permission to detect it, and the owner met us there to see what we'd found. As it turned out, my buddy found a silver Roosevelt dime, and that was all we found. We didn't detect it about an hour though. Well, the owner then told me of an old house that used to sit in front of his current house many years ago. Well, I got permission, to check that out a few days later and didn't find anything worthwhile again. So where am I going with this story? Well, he invited me into his house, and while I was looking around, I noticed some photos on the walls that showed hundreds of people sitting on the ground in at least 4 different fields. Without giving the spot away, they were all attending an event of sorts that went on several times every year for a few years back in the 40s. They also charged admission and had concessions for sale. Well, back then they didn't have these nice folding chairs like we use today to sit on. They were all sitting on the ground or on blankets. Do you think any of those folks sitting on the ground all those times ever lost anything like maybe a silver coin or two? Site number 17, scattered silver cache. Many years ago I used to arrowhead hunt a field that's at least a mile off the road and hidden in a small valley. This huge level field had an old house place on one side of it and the remains of another old house not far away. Almost every time I hunted that field, I'd find a few silver coins on top of the ground. I always thought that someone had buried a jar of coins, and years later a plow broke it and scattered the contents. Well, the land changed hands many years before I started metal detecting, and now after years of trying, I'm getting close to getting permission to go back. Site number 18, elephant on the farm. Not long after I started metal detecting, I was talking to an old farmer about ginseng hunting. Somewhere in the conversation he told me about an elephant that he saw on his farm when he was a boy. Of course I had to hear the rest of the story. As it turned out, a circus had been traveling through that part of the country heading to another location and ended up setting up on his dad's farm for a few days. He remembered old timers talking about what a crowd they had and how exciting it was. Well, my buddy and I detected it one time, but at that time the field was just too grown up to do any good. I'm planning to go back now that I've got years of experience in several better metal detectors. Site number 19, rattlesnake boundary. My detecting buddy and I detected around an old 1800s house while it was being remodeled one time. Of course, they wouldn't let us hunt in the yard, but we found a lot of coins and odds and ends in the field behind it. This had been a wealthy family back in the day. Later, I went back to ginseng hunt the mountain behind it. I was surprised to learn that one of my friends was working there. He told me there were at least 19 old house places on that piece of property. He also told me to watch out for rattlesnakes. Well, my buddy and I went on ginseng hunting. We found a couple of the old house places, but not much ginseng. So we changed directions to another part of the farm. This was the year I'd lost my hearing and I had this loud tinnitus that sounded like, cicadas or locusts or rattlesnakes at times. And, we were walking up an old logging road and all of a sudden I stopped. I wasn't sure why, but the noise in my ear had changed. About that time my buddy, who was behind me said, "There it is." Sure enough, I was one step away from a huge timber rattlesnake coiled up facing my way. Well, I've got these old house places on my list again. I've got some good snake boots and ready to go. Site number 20 is line of privies. Many years ago, my buddy and I were detecting a house that was still standing and had been there since the 1700s. There was dozens of log buildings on the property as well. Here we found a lot of silver coins and some very unique relics. We only detected it 2 or 3 times and never really scratched the surface. The last time we were there, we got in an area where we found a lot of wheat and Indian head pennies. Now this house still had someone living in it as late as the 1950s, so it should have many generations of lost items discovered. But what I've been interested in is the long line of privies. Now if you don't know what a privy is, it's a small building that's set, behind many houses. In the summertime, it was like 100 yards too close, but in the wintertime, it was 100 yards too far away, if you know what I mean. Anyway, there was a line of privies spaced about 4 or 5 foot apart, and I assumed that the one closest to the house was dug first, so they kept getting further away, so it's no telling what could be there. So I'm definitely planning a trip back to there just as soon as I can reestablish my permission. Well, thanks to my bout with COVID, being that sick brought back a lot of memories. Well, I hope you enjoyed the research tips and the stories of the sites I talked about and a little bit of information about me and saving local history. Until next time, thanks for watching.